Hey guys, today I'm going to talk to you about how to use loops in Python. So when you're considering using any type of looping mechanism in Python, what you're primarily going to be asking is if you have a definite set of numbers so you know when it's going to end, or indefinite, where you're not really sure when this loop could end, or you're not really sure how many times you're going to have to repeat your code. And usually when you're looping for your code, you're going to want to be doing it through or iterating through a list of items, or maybe a dictionaries items within that. And yeah, these are just two of the ways that you could loop, either using a for loop in Python or a while loop. So what I did is I created two different lists or arrays in Python. So I just did a simple list of numbers here, and then the second list was just a shows from the 90s. You can kind of see I set it up in a little unorthodox way. So the reason I did that is so it wasn't just a huge line. You can actually, it was more readable. So this is definitely allowed in Python as long as you have the appropriate amount of commas and you have a closing and opening bracket. So for loops, uh, you can basically in Python just iterate through any type of object that is an iterable. So they have iterators that you can just go from element to element within that list. So what can you iterate over in Python? And don't worry, I'll talk about iterators and iterables in a future video. But for all you need to know right now is that Python has special ways that you can move through objects and every element or value of an object with these looping techniques. So anything or object that you could iterate through in Python includes strings, sets, lists, dictionaries, even strings. I think you can do frozen sets as well, but that's a little bit more complicated topic. But essentially, you're just going through a sequence of characters or values. So how do you do that in Python? You use either a for or while loop. So for, because you would know the amount of items within that collection, so or it's implicitly known. So for this first array, nums, I can do for elem in nums, and actually this little part right here, I just want you to think about like a general pattern. This is basically how Python sets up this special for in pattern. So for, and then whatever you call this variable that you're iterating through. So let's just call it element, and then in, and then the name of the collection of data. So again, this is just any object that is an iterator. Collection. So basically just saying for every element in nums, and then you can do something to that element at each location. So if I were to print elem, then it would print 1, then it would go to the next element, go to 2, then print the 2, then go to 3, print 3, then go to 4, and then print 4. And you might be asking, well, how do I track numbers? Because in other programming languages, I can use an index, the actual value. So if you want to do that in Python, you could just use what's known as the enumerate built-in function. So for example, you could take the same array, so for idx value in enumerate nums, and then you can just print both statements or use it in different ways. So I'm just going to print both of those here. And again, same as before, you can name this anything, so I could rename this to n if I wanted to. It will still work the same, doesn't really matter, as long as you have the correct list that you want to iterate through. And then again, this too, so instead of calling this idx, I can call this I, works perfectly the same. And then same thing here, instead of value, I could do val, and this should work same as it did before. So let me save this and run it. And you can see how Python iterates through these lists. So Python loops.py. So you can see that for the first one, it does, sorry, first one. Okay, so the first one 1, 2, 3, 4. That's element values inside the nums list. And then here you have the index 0, 1, 2, 3. So you might be wondering, hey, why is that so? Well, with lists, essentially you start at 0 when you count something. So this goes 0, 1, 2, 3. So if you normally count something, you'd be like 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, in programming and any type of collection, so dictionaries, well, not dictionaries, but lists and arrays, you do it index based, and that index starts at 0. So just remember that. When you start counting in programming, start at 0. Okay, so I'm going to undo these just to show you, as long as everything's spelled correctly, if I were to save this, the same output happens, even though the variable names are the same. So again, it's just the principles that you are following. So you can name those whatever you want, and just whatever is the most readable makes sense to you. Another thing you can do with for loops is you can use the range function, but you don't have to write something like this. So for n in range lang, let's see, lang nums, because essentially you could just do the same thing with this or this form of using the for in loop. So a lot of times when you use the range function is like when you're working on programming interview problems, or maybe you have to start the index at some point. So instead of starting at 0, you can start it at 1. So maybe you want to do like this. Sometimes you want to stop an element before the list ends. But this is a great way to just create like a list of numbers. So you could even just print out numbers from a range. And remember, for this particular parameter right here, so this is the second one, it does not include that number. So if I did not include that first parameter, this is basically saying, hey, for n in range 0 to 10, print out 0 to 10, not including 10. So if I wanted to include 10, then I would have 11 right there. And if I don't want to include the number 0, then I would start it at 1. So this should print 1 through 10. Okay, so if I save that, you can see I have a list of 1 to 10. Perfect. Okay, so that's basically just my for loops. You can iterate through lists, but you can also iterate through dictionaries. So let me just do a quick dictionary, and I'll show you. So let's just do colors. So remember, if you want to construct a dictionary, all you have to do is open up a curly braces and then do a key value pair. So those keys and values can be like any type of data, but we're just going to keep them simple. So a string key to string value, or actually string key to integer value. So let's do red 12, blue 14, and green, let's do that 76. Okay, so if I wanted to iterate through that, all I would have to do is the same pattern for blank in that collection. So in this case, it'd be for val in colors, print val. And what this is going to do, what this is going to print out, is essentially the key. So this is only going to print out red, blue, green. So let's print that out. So red, blue, green. So let's say you wanted just the actual values right here. So 12, 14, 17. How could you do that? You can do that in two ways. You can actually just use the key, so almost as an index on that overall dictionary. So how do we find that specific value? Well, we just use the val variable and as an index. So let's say this first one right here, red. So what you're essentially doing here is calling this colors red, and since red's this key, it finds its value, and the value that gets returned is 12. Same thing with if you were to do green at the end of the iteration, that's going to return 76. So that's one way you could do it. So let's run that. Okay, so you see 12, 14, 76. You could also just do because dictionaries have built-in functions. You can do color.items, and you can do the same thing with keys if you want to specify that out. So let me just get rid of this, put val. So you can see the same numbers if I use that built-in function. Oh, actually, items, so that includes both of them. So I misspoke. And actually, if you want to print out both the key and the value, you can just, again, these, you can name whatever. I can name it key, val, and then just call it down here. So right there. And I can do the actual values. Oh, sorry. So let's say I just want to get the actual values. I want to save that for later, but you can do the dot values. And you'd have to get rid of this key right here. So what you should expect to see here is 12, 14, 76. You can also use the keys function. You won't have to do it because, as we described, if you just do for val and colors, it just implicitly does this. But let's say you wanted to just get the keys built-in method for something else, it's going to print those out. So really cool thing again, wanted to point out here is that items function. So you can actually, if you were to just do val, you see how it returns basically a tuple of two values. So it's returning the color and the key. So basically when you set up these two variables right here, what it is doing is just going into that tuple and then returning the actual key and value to you. So yeah, that's how you could iterate over a dictionary. And then finally I want to go over while loops. So with while loops, you basically you would use it often in conditional. So if this condition is true, keep on running the code. If it's false, then break the code, and move on to the next line. So you can use this, for example, in problems like binary search, a lot of other interviewing problems where you have a certain condition that hasn't been met until you run the code enough times. The only issue that you might have trouble with here is if you don't set your conditions properly. So you don't set an instance like where your statement can eventually be false or true. Oh, no, where it can eventually be false, then your code could run forever. So for example, if I wrote if true, print x, and I ran this, it would just run forever until I got a Stack Overflow. So you want to make sure there's a way for your condition to be able to break after a while. So for example, let's say you just want to do a simple, hey, run this until count is more than 10. So while count is less than 10, print count. And then how do you break this loop? How do you change the state? So eventually this true statement could become false, and then the iteration or looping can end. Well, you change the conditions so that's possible. So eventually this is going to just run until it's past 10, and it'll break on to the next line. And I'm just going to add like a simple print statement. Just you can see here is the next line. Perfect. Okay, let's run that. So you can see here's the next line. So it went from 0 to 9, and eventually once it got to 10, 10 is not less than 10, so that's false. And once that's false, it can break out and go into the next line. So this looping, again, is very important. You can do a ton of different operators here, and I'll explain a little bit that more in my conditionals video. But essentially, you could do anything. You could say, hey, while this string or like array is not empty, then keep on running. So I want you to think about like any type of conditionals you do with if statements, elif statements, or like just any statement of truth. You can do with a while statement. But just be careful on being able to create a way to break or exit out of this while loop. And just one other thing I wanted to mention with these while loops is you could possibly use continue and break statements, but that will be further explained in the conditionals video. So guys, thanks for watching, and see you guys in the next video.